Should the New York Giants buy or sell by the trade deadline? I'll give you my take, names to watch, and the reasons why, including one nobody's really talking about. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And a hello to everybody. Welcome on in, New York Giant fans, to the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Trenna, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, a special welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, should the New York Giants be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline? I'm going to discuss that, as well as outline some scenarios for you and kind of give you a little bit of background, including one element that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, but really need to be talking about as far as the direction I think the Giants are going to go. Then the Giants, are they playing with fire by sticking with Daniel Jones as their starting quarterback? I think they are. I'll explain why by taking a look at the numbers, the ramifications, and just why continuing to run it back with Daniel Jones is really not a smart thing to do, in my opinion. And then finally, should the New York Giants consider benching Deonte Banks? We'll talk about that, reasons why not, and we'll close out the show with that topic. So again, welcome on in. Let's get into it. All right. Buyers or sellers? Now, I did a segment on New York Giants on SI, and I said that the Giants shouldn't hold a fire sale. Now, let me just clarify that. A fire sale, basically, everything must go. Anybody who's not considered, untouchable, like the Dexter Lawrences of the world, or the Andrew Thomases, or the Brian Burnses, or the Bobby Okerekes, those guys are untouchable or considered untouchable. Malik Neighbors, also add him in there. And otherwise, everybody else is up for grabs. Well, I don't believe the Giants should hold a fire sale for the simple reason that you need a core foundation to your team. And I think despite the results of this season so far, the Giants have that. All right. So at quarterback, they still need to get their guy. All right. Receiver, I think we can all agree Wan'Dale Robinson, Malik Neighbors are part of the core. Tight end, Theo Johnson, part of the core. Offensive line, you can make a case, obviously, for Andrew Thomas. You can make a case for Jermaine Illuminor for the time being. You could probably make a case for John Michael Schmitz, even though Schmitz has had another up and down season this year. Defensive line, Dexter Lawrence. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Linebacker, Bobby Okereke, definitely is part of the core. Outside linebackers, Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns, all part of the core. Cornerback, you can make the case for Deonte Banks at safety. You could make the case for Drew Phillips. I'm sorry, Drew Phillips would be with cornerback at safety. You can make a case for Tyler Nubin, Jason Pinnock. So, the Giants have core pieces. And I have to laugh because I've seen so many times on social media now, the Viking fans seem to have this infatuation with the Giants wanting to trade Dexter Lawrence to them. Folks, that's not going to happen. I feel pretty confident saying that the Giants aren't going to trade Dexter Lawrence to the Minnesota Vikings or to anybody. That would just be stupid on their part. And I don't care how bad their record is. All right, now, what about being regular sellers, just engaging in some trades? Well, I have always been of the opinion that if a guy is not in your long-term future and you can maybe move him to a team looking for that type of position and get a draft pick or two, do it. So, two guys that I don't believe are in the long-term plans. And, it would pain me to lose these guys, but, you gotta think long term here. Azeez Ojulari, outside linebacker, and Darius Slayton, wide receiver. Now, again, I don't want to see them traded. I happen to like both of them. I think both of them are decent players, but they're not in the long term plans. All right. So you look at the Detroit Lions. Head coach Dan Campbell, the Detroit Lions, said that they are working the phones trying to get themselves an edge rusher. You don't think if you're Joe Shane, it might behoove you to pick up the phone, call Brad Holmes over there at the Lions, the GM, and say, hey, what do you give us for Azeez Ojulari? Now, some people will say complicating the trade of Ojulari is the fact that Kayvon Thibodeau is still on injured reserve with the wrist injury, with basically what's a 4 to 6 week injury. You know what? At this point, if the season's going down the tubes, does it really matter if you put Tamon Fox there the rest of the year or somebody else? Bring in maybe a guy up from the practice squad. Does it matter at this point? No, you just want to get through the year. But I'll explain why in a minute, why I think, you just say, you know what, just move forward and call it a day. But first, I want to talk about Darius Slayton. Now, in the past, I've said, look, Darius Slayton is a better receiver than Jalen Hyatt right now. All right. And now complicating matters, Jalen Hyatt has a cracked rib, which may deter the Giants. But again, you could bring up an Isaiah Hodgins if you need to replace Darius Slayton if you decide to move him. The 49ers need help at receiver. You don't think that, sending Darius Slayton over there, you can't get a draft pick or two for him? I could see it happening. Just like I could see it happening for Detroit to give the Giants something for Azeez Ojulari. All right. These are teams that basically are probably be in the postseason hunt, especially the Lions. So if the Lions feel that they're one pass rusher away and you look at what Azeez Ojulari has done this year, you definitely make the call if you're Joe Shane. And you don't think twice about it. Now, here's why this is so important. As of right now, if the draft were to be held tomorrow, there are currently 5 teams ahead of the New York Giants in the draft order. The Giants right now are slated 9th. There are 5 teams ahead of them that need quarterbacks. They are in order: Carolina, Cleveland, Tennessee, the Rams, and the Raiders. If you're Joe Shane and you intend to get a quarterback in this draft next year, and I do believe that is the case, you start stockpiling draft capital now, especially if you're going to have to move up. You've got to, I'm not saying the Giants should tank. I don't believe in tanking, but you've got a head coach in Brian Dable who wants to win every game. And if you have another situation like you had last year where, the backup quarterback comes in, Tommy DeVito, and he rattles off 3 wins and it knocks you down the draft order, you better have some draft capital in case that happens. All right. So this way you can still be competitive, send a positive message to your locker room, but also have the capital if you need to move up. And right now, I don't think the Giants have enough capital if they needed to move up to say to, the top 5 to get a quarterback. So I absolutely believe that the Giants should be active at the trade deadline. I don't think they should do a fire sale, not in the least. You do need that core, like I told you. But guys who are not in the long-term plans, why let them walk away and sign elsewhere and get nothing in return, or, take a gamble and hope that you're going to get at the end of the or the following year that you're going to get a comp pick. They need help now. They need draft capital now. So if you're Joe Shane, you'd be foolish not to explore the possibility of moving Ojulari and Darius Slayton regardless. So yeah, that's my verdict. Giants should sell, but not a fire sale. All right, coming up next, why the Giants are playing with fire by continuing to stick with Daniel Jones as their starter. We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans. So with the New York Yankees in the World Series, there's going to be no hotter ticket in town to get your hands on than those. And if you are having trouble finding tickets to root the Yankees on, look no further than to our friends over at Game Time. Game Time makes finding the tickets you want faster and easier than ever before. It offers seats at competitive prices. With Game Time, there are no hidden fees. You'll know exactly what you're paying for before you check out. You'll get clear images of your seat views, and you'll also get event cancellation protection. And if you find your tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the tickets you want, especially if they're to the Yankees game. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. Hey, Giant fans, PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can get in on all the action during weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, when PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks puts its members first so that all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Get your payouts in as soon as 15 minutes after you request them. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to have Crossover Thursday with Locked On Steelers host Chris Carter. So that, of course, will be Thursday's show. And then coming up on Friday, I'm going to have another guest for you. You guys seem to like these guests that I bring in with different perspectives, and I'm really happy to welcome in this guest. He's Ted Wynn of The Athletic. He does their film study for them, and it's always good to get a guy who really dives into the film and have them come on and get their perspective on what's going on with the team and, you know, what could be fixed, what can't be fixed, and so forth. So that's what's coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you will tune in. All right, in this segment, are the Giants playing with fire by continuing to run it back with Daniel Jones this season? I think they are. All right. Now, I know you're probably thinking, there she goes again, Daniel Jones hater. But hear me out on this. We all know about the injury guarantee. And the way it works is if Daniel Jones gets injured, you know, given his injury history, you can't rule that out. But if he gets injured, cannot pass a physical next spring, I believe by the first day of the new league year is the cutoff. I'm not sure, but I believe that's it. The Giants will be on the hook for $23 million of his $30 million base salary. All right. Now, here's the other thing, folks. The Giants, you know, let's say Daniel Jones doesn't get hurt. Fingers crossed. The Giants have until March 15th to make a decision on Jones, because as of March 15th, $12 million of Jones's salary becomes fully guaranteed. So if the Giants are going to cut him, and I believe that will be the case, they will have to do so by the 15th of March next year. Now, getting back to the injury guarantee, the Giants, if they cut Daniel Jones, they will be on the hook for a little over $22 million in dead money, which is the rest of the prorated signing bonus. They'll save 19, but they'll be on the hook for $22 million. Now, if you add in that injury guarantee, now you're upping the amount of money they are potentially on the hook for if you don't have Daniel Jones on the roster. All right. Now, why is that a big deal? Now, keep in mind, salary cap space between now and next year, it's fluid. But here's the situation. The Giants, according to Over the Cap, currently have $48.1 million total cap space next year. If they have to eat dead money, $22 million plus, well, do the math. You're basically having that. Okay? Their effective cap space, which is what they would have left after they have signed 51 guys, including their projected draft pick, they would have only 30.382 million. All right, so now here's the problem, guys. If you get that injury guarantee on your books, you are now going to have to restructure a lot of contracts. So let me take you back to the last year, the Dave Gettleman era. What did Dave Gettleman do that basically put the Giants in cap hell? That's right, folks. He restructured a bunch of contracts to create room to sign guys. That is the last thing you want for Joe Schoen to do if it comes down to it. So, that being said, Brian Dable has said he's going to stick with Daniel Jones. He says that, he gives him the best chance to win, which, by the way, is a very sorry statement on the state of the quarterback's room if he feels that way. But given how Daniel Jones plays, and, I've been screaming about this for a while now, and I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. Daniel Jones is a runner. He runs like a running back, meaning the guy doesn't slide. He leads head first, shoulder first. And every time I see him dive forward, trying to pick up that extra yard or two, I think to myself, oh gosh, don't get hurt. That's the risk, one of the risks the Giants are playing with, and why I say they are playing with fire with regards to continuing to start Daniel Jones. Now, from Brian Dable's perspective, I understand he wants to win games. And if you pull Daniel Jones at this point, you're basically maybe sending a message to the locker room that you're throwing in the towel on the season. And I can understand that he doesn't want that to look that way. You're also sending that message to ownership. And if you're in a position now where you're fighting for your job, you don't want to have a bad look. You don't want the bad optics. But this is starting to get concerning because look, the Giants have only won 2 games. They're 2-5. Their schedule doesn't get any easier. Maybe they beat the Carolina Panthers. Who knows at this rate? They've got the Pittsburgh Steelers Monday night. They never do well under the lights. All right. This season has the potential to really spiral out of control. And I still say that if it gets to a point where the Giants just have absolutely no hope of making a miraculous run, you pull Daniel Jones. Now, what's going to save Daniel, I think, for the time being, is that despite the fact the Giants are 2-5 and in the NFC East cellar, there's really not a whole lot of separation right now between the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Eagles. The Commanders, they're running away with the division right now. So the Cowboys, they've been struggling. The Eagles, despite their big win over the Giants, they've been struggling a little bit. But there's really not a whole lot of separation. In a few weeks, I think there will be more. And then you can make that case of, okay, let's sit Daniel Jones down. Let's not risk it. But look, here's the bottom line. Brian Dable, when was the last time you saw a head coach pull the starting quarterback in a blowout loss and say, oh, I'm putting the backup in because I was looking for a spark? The fact that Dable admitted that should tell you all you need to know about the sentiments about Daniel Jones as the starting quarterback. And that's not the only thing that Dable has said or done that indicates to me that he's about this close to being done with Daniel Jones. So yeah, Dable is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He wants to give the team the best chance to win. Unfortunately, that's Daniel Jones right now. 6 one, half a dozen of the other. But yeah, they are playing with fire, and they just got to hope that they don't get burnt, that Daniel Jones's running style and his desire to show how tough he is doesn't come back to bite them as maybe it has in the past when he has tried to run and led with his head or his shoulder or whatever. So that is the concern I have with Daniel Jones, and the Giants continue to stick with him. It's a very realistic concern because, look, I don't want to see the Giants end up in cap purgatory. I just don't, because it takes a couple years to get out of it. And this team is far from being complete. It's not one quarterback away from being a championship team, right? There's some other needs that this team needs to address. So if you're the Giants, sentiments aside, be smart about it, especially if you find out that you're out of it, in the next couple weeks or so. All right, coming up next, should the Giants bench Deonte Banks? We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. And right now, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. And Giant fans, please, if you're watching on YouTube, consider giving the video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. And don't forget to click the little notification bell so that you are alerted every time I post a new video. And if you're listening to the Locked On Giants podcast on our audio platforms, a 5-star review is always appreciated. So thank you in advance for anything you could do. It is appreciated. All right. Should the Giants bench Deonte Banks? Now, I mentioned this on my X account, and I had a few people come back at me and said, ha ha, yeah, benched our best cornerback when Daniel Jones stinks. Folks, here's why I think the Giants need to bench Deonte Banks. All right. There are several plays, and I posted this over on New York Giants on SI in an article aptly titled, Should the Giants bench Deonte Banks, where the effort was lacking, where it looked like Deonte Banks was making a business decision. Now, we all remember how Jerome Henderson, the Giants passing game coordinator / defensive backs coach, called Banks out after his 55-yard touchdown given up to CeeDee Lamb back in week 4. To Banks' credit, he responded. He seemed to get the message. But in subsequent weeks, whether he's playing, because he's not sure of himself or he's making business decisions, and I personally think it might be the latter, he's back to taking plays off. All right. There was obviously the Jalen Hurts run. There was another run where Saquon Barkley broke free for a big gain, and Trey Hawkins tried to bring him down, and there's Banks just standing there taking in the view. There were a couple of examples from the Bengals game where Banks kind of, half-baked it. There is some mounting evidence that Banks is taking plays off. And you know what, folks? That's a bad habit to get into and a bad look. And, Brian Dable was asked about it, and the usual answer, we'll take care of it in-house, we'll address it, we'll get better, yada, yada, yada. All right, look, they tried dealing with it in-house. Didn't work. Jerome Henderson called Banks out, and it worked for 1 week, but he went right back to doing the other thing. Finding the guy, if that's even allowed, I don't know if that's even allowed. I don't think it is, but if it were allowed, that's not going to do it. The only way you're going to send a message, not just to Banks, but to the team in general, that half-baked efforts will not be tolerated, you sit the kid. Now, I'm not saying sit him for the entire game. I'm well aware of the fact that he's one of the better cornerbacks, and who knows, maybe that's what he's thinking. Maybe he's thinking, oh, they won't bench me because I'm the best they got at the position. I don't know. But you take away playing time. And what better way to do that than on national television, where if the kid starts off on the bench because of a lack of effort, you're sending a message not just to him, but to the rest of the team that this type of half-baked play will not be tolerated. All right. It's basically, I know it comes across as embarrassing the player, but look, sometimes tough love is necessary. And Banks, for whatever the reason, just isn't getting it. The fact that he went back to the same behaviors in the Bengals game and the Eagles game, he's just not getting it. And look, if I'm a player in that locker room and I see a second-year player, half-baking it, when I'm out there busting my hump, I get pretty ticked off. Now, I'm not saying that has happened in the locker room. I don't think it has. I don't think it will. That's why Dable needs to nip this in the bud and put Banks down on the bench for, let's say, a quarter. Doesn't even have to be a full game. Doesn't have to be a half. Put him on the bench for a quarter. and send a message to him that this will not be tolerated. Because look, if he doesn't do something about it, then what are we doing here? In the past, Dable's been, accused by some people in the media as running a little bit of a country club with babying some guys with injuries. I don't know that to be true. I don't know if I necessarily agree with all that, but I do know this much. If you allow bad behavior to continue and you don't nip it in the bud, then it's going to become a problem in the locker room. That much I can tell you because I've seen it happen. All right. I saw it happen with Eli Apple when he started, dogging it out there. And I get it. Deonte Banks is far better than Eli Apple ever was, but the situation is almost similar. And I'd hate to see, the locker room, you know, splinter because one guy or however many guys are dogging it and getting away with it. So Dable needs to act, and he needs to act this week, in my opinion. We'll see if he does. If he doesn't, then fasten your seatbelts. That's all I could say. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, I appreciate you tuning in, spending part of your day with us. Keep it here all week long. Crossover Thursday with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. Ted Wynn of The Athletic will be my guest on Friday. And don't forget to check out the channel for a new episode of the NFC Squad. That should be dropping, I believe, on Wednesday night. So can't wait to see you then. Talk to you tomorrow, Giant fans.